So I'd like to welcome everyone to a webinar with CEI and Duquesne Light on digital transformation. Digital transformation has been a rich and valuable conversation that Microsoft has been having with all of its customers across the business landscape. It's truly shaping business today and more important for the future. So my name is James Trammell. I'm a developer TS at Microsoft. What that means is I talk to our business customers across the Mid-Atlantic about dev matters, DevOps, and many other things. So real quick about our presenters today, a little bit about CEI. So we have a long-standing relationship with CEI. They're a valuable and valued Microsoft Gold partner for the past 12 years with a variety of competencies in areas like app dev, integration, and Xamarin. They also have some of the best devs and architects in the industry, including a Microsoft Regional Director, half a dozen Microsoft Partner Technical Professionals, and MVPs. So specifically today, speaking to you, we have three folks. We have Megan Abernathy, who is CEI's Marketing Manager and today's moderator. She'll be getting us through today's webinar. We have Jeff Tewksbury, who's CEI's Senior Principal Architect and Azure Practice Thought Leader. Jeff has 12 years of experience in software development, architecture, and design. He's experienced in leading large, complex engagements around the Microsoft stack, primarily with Azure. And he has leading implementation of countless clients to Microsoft Azure, including but limited to governance, planning, via migration, mentoring, etc. And then finally, our distinguished guest is Sanjay Akut, the Director of Corporate Applications. Is also our keynote speaker today. So Sanjay has been an IT leader in Pittsburgh for more than 20 years. He attended Carnegie Mellon University and left there to start his own software company in the mid-90s. He ran that company for 10 years and then made a move into the application development area of the corporate world, holding various leadership positions while still staying close to technology. Sanjay has been a proponent of cloud technologies and DevOps for the last 5 years. So now I'd like to turn it over to Megan to get the webinar started.
Great. Thanks so much, James. So as James mentioned, I'm your moderator for today's webinar. And before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to just go over a few items so you know how you can participate in today's event. We definitely welcome you to ask questions during the presentation, and you can do so by typing them into the message panel on the left of your screen. So then James and I will monitor your questions and we'll do our best to provide you with answers. But if we are not able to provide you with your answer, we'll save your question for the Q&A session that's going to be following today's presentation. And the presentation will last about 45 minutes and it will be recorded. So tomorrow you will be receiving an email with the recording as well as the presentation deck. And I'm going to go ahead and type my email address into the message panel should you need anything during today's webinar or following today's webinar. And if there are no questions, I will turn it over to Jeff to go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you, Megan. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Megan. Thanks, James. And a special thanks to Sanjay for being with us today. Welcome, Sanjay. So I want to start off by just seeing if you mind introducing yourself and also just talking a little bit about Duquesne Light.
Sure. So thanks, Jeff, and thanks, everyone, for having me. I really appreciate it. So my name is Sanjay Akut, and as James mentioned, I've been in the IT space for a little over 20 years or so. Really come up through the application development space. So I'm a developer by trade. I try to stay as close to it as I can. I like to joke that I haven't committed any production code in a long time, but I still like to tinker. So, I think that's a little bit scary to some of my development folks, but I try to stay as close to it as I can.
Very nice.
So I've been here at Duquesne Light for a little over a year and a half now. And Duquesne Light is a 100-plus-year-old utility company. So we are the light company in Pittsburgh and the greater Pittsburgh area, serving 600,000-plus customers. And we've been around for a long time. And you traditionally wouldn't think of your light company as the hotbed of technology, right? And so a few years ago, leadership here at Duquesne Light decided that we wanted to undergo an IT transformation, and then new IT leadership came into place. My boss, the CIO, Mark Miko, came in April of 2015, so a few months before me. I was part of his leadership team that he brought in and to really help and run the app space, and specifically the Microsoft development side of the app dev
awesome.
space.
And so how many employees do you have in your side of the organization?
So my side of the organization, I have about 35 people. We are 200 plus in IT itself. My side of the organization, we have about 35 people. When we flex up and down using partners like CEI, so we'll flex up and down from around 30, 35 folks.
Awesome. And what's the tech landscape like here at Duquesne Light?
So the tech landscape is very interesting. So our core business is the transmission distribution of electricity. And so on that side of the house, really the operations side of the house, we really are an Oracle shop. We run a package called the Oracle Utility Suite, and that kind of runs that side of the house. I'm on the corporate application side, and so we kind of have two centers. There's an Oracle Center of Excellence, and I was brought in to build and start the Microsoft Center of Excellence. So we've decided to really go all in on the Microsoft stack for everything other than that core utility suite. So it used to be, and part of the IT transformation was a lot of our applications were legacy Cold Fusion. So I inherited a lot of legacy Cold Fusion.
Fun.
Yes, exactly. Really fun. And my team that I inherited, they did a tremendous job, and it really would have been a fun place. They kind of homegrown everything in Cold Fusion. So it really would have been a fun place that we just made the decision that technology is moving more towards the Microsoft stack, and that's why we've decided to make the shift.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you. And so, so let's kick this thing off. So like James said, data transformation and digital transformation, it's a really interesting, enticing topic nowadays, and mainly because it's centered to so many organizations' technical strategies. Right? And really what's driving that, at least in my eyes, is the fact that it's being driven by this idea of this fourth industrial revolution, right? So if we look back to what's referred to as the third industrial revolution, that was very much defined by the digitization of information, right? The proliferation of connected devices and the internet. And as we now find ourselves in this fourth industrial revolution, it's very much defined by kind of the blurring physical world and the digital world, right? And we see this, we see a number of patterns of how this is being implemented in organizations. Some very common themes. One is that organizations are finding new ways to engage with their customers, right? We see things like VR, IoT, bots. These are all kind of new, exciting ways which organizations are finding to interface with their clients. Businesses are empowering their employees to be more productive through new collaboration tools and cloud technologies. They're optimizing their operations, leveraging the practices of DevOps, going through continuous delivery and automated failover and application monitoring, even like predictive application monitoring, right, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And finally, and probably one of the more exciting areas is that the power of big data and machine learning is driving and transforming a lot of the products that we deliver. So I was curious to get your standpoint on this. Obviously, information, as you said, was one of the main reasons that you were brought in, and it's one of your focal points. It's definitely key to your strategy. Where do you see digital transformation taking the IT industry, and probably more importantly, where do you see your strategy and your goals being kind of molded by digital transformation?
So this is a great conversation, Jeff, and I really like this slide because each of the four pillars that you have on that slide really represent kind of a core tenet that we are looking at here at Duquesne Light. So engaging customers, really engaging customers in the new and different ways. So your traditional light company, you don't think of them as being this forward-thinking. How many light companies out there a few years ago had mobile apps and things like that? Mm-hmm. So we want to engage customers not only with the latest and greatest, but just in different ways, really allow them to do things differently and engage with us a little bit differently. And then that moves us to empowering our employees. So within the organization, I really oversee that corporate function.
Yep.
So I am really in charge of, and my group is charged with making our folks more productive and more efficient, and all of the things that you talked about, whether it's our customers engaging with us in a different way, that traditionally would have been a call to our call center, and we can move them to a different channel, get them their answer faster, and make our call center more efficient to maybe handle some of the more difficult calls that we get on a day-to-day basis. And that really moves us into optimizing the operation. So when we talk about efficiency, we're talking about, think of the grid and all of the different sensors and things like that are all along the grid, and the massive amounts of data that are there. And exactly as you talked about, predictive analytics, things like equipment, predicting equipment faults and stuff like that. Maybe we get out into your neighborhood, Jeff, and we change the transformer because we know it's going to go out before it affects your power for your family. So, and that really comes to the transformation of the product itself. The product at Duquesne Light is interesting, right? You're either in our territory or you're not. We either send and have the wires going into your house so we provide you electricity, or we don't. But the way that we provide that to you can be very different, and big data can really empower us to do that.
Yeah.
So imagine me telling you that, hey, Jeff, I send you a text message and I say, maybe you left your toaster oven on because your electricity has spiked a little bit.
Or because my house is on fire.
Exactly, something like that, Jeff. And that would be allowing us to transform our product and the offering that we give to our customers.
No, that's really interesting. And I think, if you think about it, as customers have become more tech savvy and as technology has matured, the process that we put in place had to mature as well. So I think about, customers now, they expect frequent software updates, right? They expect new ways of interfacing, convenient ways of interfacing with their applications. They expect their services and their apps and their devices to be perfect, to be on 100% of the time. They expect their application to have a cognitive side. I want my application to be able to be geared towards me, right? And I do feel like cloud technology is kind of what's at the center of that, and that what can help bring that to the mass. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
It really is, and it's really, so in order to do all of this stuff, you have to lay the correct technology platform, and that was really the charge when I started here. Mm-hmm. It was, what platform is going to enable us to deliver those services exactly as you described, and exactly as you said, the cloud platform is really the best way and the most agile and nimble way for us to be able to deliver those things and focus on that delivery of value and not focus on a lot of the things that we used to focus on as an IT organization.
Right, administrative, yeah.
That's right, exactly.
Awesome. All right, so this we'll look at this diagram in more detail later on in the presentation, but what I really did want to talk about is the idea that while I think everyone would agree that digital transformation, moving to the cloud adoption, those are both sound technological strategies, right? They're probably good decisions to make. That being said, implementing such a strategy comes with a number of challenges, right? I mean, you're challenged to juggle this transformation along with dealing with how employees have typically worked and dealing with your personnel, dealing with difficult timelines that you need to meet even outside of this. Even dealing with maintaining existing applications as you go through this transition. So I'm curious, do you have any advice or recommendations that you could give to others as they go and they formulate their cloud roadmap and their own cloud strategy?
Sure. So we really started off with a project, and this diagram shows kind of our layout of the new DuquesneLight.com website.
Correct, yep.
And we kind of started with that as hey, why don't we use that as our entree point into the cloud? And coming from a development background, what I really took the mindset of was enabling and empowering that development team with any of the tools that they needed. And in our case, that really was the entire Azure stack. Mm-hmm. It was, what can we use in Azure to allow us to empower those developers to deliver these products that we need quickly, reliably, with high scalability and low maintenance, right? So we really started looking at that, and what we did was we just let them go. So we embraced the DevOps mindset of this kind of empowerment of the development team and the application team with just go and learn, do what you need to do. And I know that the old way of thinking, the infrastructure and operations folks of the world would traditionally get a little squirrely with that.
Sure.
And because it can lead to, and actually probably will initially lead to, a little bit of sprawl and a little bit of a feel of the Wild West. But in order to really accelerate the innovation, I think you have to kind of jump in.
And to learn so that you can bring that back in again, right? You don't necessarily know the direction that you're going to go with a lot of these tools until you've had a chance to work with them.
Exactly. Right. And it really is a little bit of a change from that traditional approach. And the best way to learn is to jump in.
Oh, and I would echo that. So being able to have a chance to be on your team, I would say that was one of the probably, for me, one of the fundamental drivers for the successful adoption we've had, right? Because the ability, the accessibility, the openness with the platform and the empowerment, I think, is critical in many instances, because I have seen other organizations that try to bring their kind of original, like you said, that IT admin mentality of, checks and balances and change control, and this needs to go through lock and key and everything to get things provisioned. I think that often leads to a lot of frustration, which can then, obviously slow adoption. And so that open aspect that you talk about, I think, is critical.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So this slide here, I'm fairly confident this was the result of someone being challenged to use every single Azure icon that they could think of. But I do think it does a pretty good job of kind of summarizing, the Azure offering. And it is important to note that this is kind of a snapshot in time, because Azure is constantly growing its service platforms. But just to kind of highlight it at a 1,000-foot view, towards the bottom here we have our infrastructure services. And really when we think about this, we're thinking more about virtual machines, right, VMs. And there are a lot of great cases for VMs. But one of the things to note about VMs is that they require your tender loving care, right? They require you to patch them. They require you to monitor them. They require you to basically install everything above the OS and the virtualization. Above that, interestingly, we have platform services. So when we talk about platform services, there we're actually providing the capability of having a service be more the commodity, right? More application building blocks. We're kind of delegating the underlying infrastructure and the supporting operations to Azure, letting them take care of that, and we're just consuming these services, right? Almost as APIs. Now, obviously, you heavily embrace the platform mentality, the platform first kind of mindset. And I've worked with numerous organizations, and many have that same mindset. But I've also worked with others that lean the other way. They tend to have an infrastructure first mindset as a way of solving problems. And typically when I talk to those folks, it usually boils down to a fear of a lack of control over the hardware and over the systems that are kind of hosting the application. I'm wondering if you don't mind talking a little bit about kind of what draws you to platform and how it impacts your approach to development and operation.
Sure. So I think coming up from the development side myself, a lot of the challenges that I've faced over my 20-plus years of doing this were really on that infrastructure side. Mm-hmm. So the maintenance, the patching, the things like that, the patch Tuesdays and having to retest everything because we're really trying to maintain that level of compliance. And from my side, as a developer wanting to write cool things and really solve business problems through technology, that part of it just really wasn't interesting. Yep. It wasn't exciting, and there wasn't a huge value add in me or my team playing a big part in that. So looking to make this move to cloud, and I completely agree with you, there is absolutely still a place, and probably a big place for infrastructure as a service. But what that kind of eliminates for you is the need to worry about racking and stacking servers. Mm-hmm. And then what it empowers you with is unlimited compute and storage, or not have to worry about those things. But other than that, the maintenance that comes along with a VM, you have to do everything just as if you did it. Yep. And for a lot of folks who have these remote data centers, it really isn't too terribly different than what they do with an on-prem, quote-unquote, server with a VM that they would do in Azure, other than this unlimited compute and storage, I just don't. So from our perspective and coming up from the development side, what I said was I want to empower all the people that work on my team to do the really interesting things, and that truly is just consuming the platform as a service. Yeah. So our motto going into everything was, prove to me why platform as a service will not work for us, and we haven't found an instance where it doesn't yet.
It's awesome. Yeah, and definitely. So the ability to focus on your app's capabilities and not on the management of the infrastructure to support that app is huge. And, I think about it in terms of going back to old business class when we used to talk about, how do you derive your competitive advantage as an organization? And as an energy organization, you don't define any competitive advantage by being really good at data center operations.
That's right.
That's not where you want to focus your energy and your attention. That being said, that's what Azure defines their competitive advantage as. Right?
Exactly.
So that's what I typically tell clients is that, if you look at a platform like Azure, they're spending billions of dollars focusing on problems like high availability, predictive maintenance, self-healing, security and compliance. they're meeting with the Apache and the Redis and the SQL teams to figure out how do we best optimize our solution to host your applications. And so I typically, as a developer, want to leverage their expertise in that space.
Exactly. It is the fastest way to value for the business.
Yep. Awesome. All right. So this slide gets into more specifically the .com rewrite that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, what were some of the primary, we haven't listed here, but maybe you could summarize, what are some of the primary architectural and operational goals that you had for the redesign?
Sure. So when I came in, as I said, DuquesneLight.com at the time was a legacy Cold Fusion app, written from the ground up, pure Cold Fusion code. Mm-hmm. So there were a number of different things that we wanted to do. First off, we just wanted to modernize the technology stack. So that was that was moving to .NET. We also wanted to embrace a content management system. So literally, if you wanted a text change, or our corporate communications group wanted a text change, it was an IT request and a code deployment to change that code in the legacy app. So we wanted to, that was a fundamental shift that we wanted to do. Empowering. We wanted to do empowering our business users, right? So that was it. So now that we started to make this move, we traditionally had hosted our website infrastructure, our own DMZ and our own data centers and all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so really thought to ourselves, why? What value, you just described it, Jeff, what value are we adding? And really, is that what we want to be the best at running a DMZ? Or do we want to run a world-class application on top of a world-class infrastructure that someone else is spending $1 billion to maintain, right? So we decided to just go with the cloud, and it really opened things up for us. We started looking at all the different platforms that we could embrace and use. We started looking at the scalability enhancements that it would allow us to do without really even thinking about them too much, Yep. The scaling up and scaling out almost automatically is just such a key feature. Think of outages for Duquesne Light. Whenever you traditionally would go to our website maybe once a month, right, to pay your bill. Hopefully you're going to it once a month to pay your bill, right? But whenever we have an outage, that's whenever we really need to ramp up. So that is a time when our usage actually spikes. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to scale out if necessary automatically, for us to build that infrastructure internally, we would be sitting there with all this excess compute never used, but we already paid for.
So let's talk about that, because that's one of the first services we kind of enlisted here, right, was Azure App Services.
That's right.
So Azure's platform for hosting, web APIs, even mobile applications, and obviously web applications here. And this is a little bit of a busy slide, and it's just giving kind of a sampling of the services that are provided by the App Service platform. You mentioned one of the critical ones, which is the auto scaling and the balancing, which is just built in for you. I'm curious, when you look at app services, how has it changed the way you deploy and operate, your website?
So I really think, and I hate to keep using the term, but the term empowerment. I mean, I really think that it just empowers our development team to focus on the things that they really care about, which is that value piece. I can't tell you how great that it is as a developer to not have to get into the IIS admin console ever.
Right.
When you just jump into the Azure portal and we're using all of the deployment slots and release management and kind of automatically the continuous integration piece to automatically push code and builds and trigger builds upon check-ins and all of those things, and managing environments within kind of a single console, that single pane of glass, if you will. It's just been such an empowering tool set for the development team that I'll tell you, we all learned this as, with this project, and I can guarantee you that no one would ever want to go back.
Great. Yeah, I can believe it. And, in a similar vein, that's more on like the application hosting side. So I can say that, honestly, one of my kind of favorite platforms that we have in Azure is Azure SQL Database, mainly just because it addresses such a fundamental and ubiquitous kind of need, right? So the ability to have a scalable, cost-effective, highly available SQL environment is just given to you, right? Without the need for configuring clusters and failover and everything, it's just amazing to me.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Jeff, and it really is. I mean, Azure SQL Database has come a long way, and it really, when you take the mindset of prove to me why platform as a service won't work, and it has come so far that there are very few examples of a SQL Server database that just will not work in Azure SQL, and talk about the traditional DBA role. You know, you are really empowering those folks to focus on the things that they really want to do and do well.
Right.
You know, query optimization and those types of things. And Azure will even suggest things for you along the way.
Yeah.
That just makes it tremendous. It's just it's one of the platforms that we are all in on and really have a strong push to move all of our databases that we can over into the Azure SQL platform.
Yeah, that's nice. So you mentioned the SQL Database Advisor, which, that service that you're given to it when you buy into the Azure SQL Database platform, it'll help you to give recommendations to the query indexing optimization in terms of schema optimization, even pooling optimization. I remember, so as you said, we're running on Sitefinity, which is a .NET CMS platform, and it comes with its own database to manage content and everything, and we deploy that out to Azure SQL Database, no issue. But I do remember that we were on version 8.2 or something, a couple versions back, and I remember seeing in the advisor tuning window, hey, you should think about putting an index on this column on this table because it would probably really help you based on what we're seeing on your usage. And when we upgrade to 9.2, Sitefinity had gone ahead and put that index in as part of the upgrade.
Yes.
So it was definitely finding things, right, that were appropriate for that. So, to take another look, I do remember also we were sitting there and we have a lot of dev database, right, a lot of dev tests. I think we have somewhere in the range of probably 10 to 12 databases which are in our whole entire continuous integration environment. I remember letting you know one day that I got a notification to say, hey, it looks like you can probably save about $100 if you pool these with a set number of DTUs in an elastic pool.
Yes.
Which is just amazing, right? It's just kind of helping us along the way to help us better understand our usage and help us better then define our environment in Azure.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are a couple of great examples, and it's just been a tremendous boon for us, and really all about empowerment, using that tool set to the burden, not having to worry about the burden of backing up.
Yeah.
Azure SQL just does it for you. Is just tremendous, and let us focus on the things that really add a ton of value.
Yeah, some of the other things like scaling up with a slider, just up and down, just as simple as sliding a slider up and down. Security, so looking at like transport layer security for data in motion, transport data encryption for data at rest, access control, row level security, automated data masking, automated auditing of your database activity, threat detection, anomalous activity. These are all things which you get out of the box, which, again, traditionally, these are not simple tasks when you're working with a full-blown, custom install of SQL Server.
Absolutely, and all of those security controls that they put in place and that are really ubiquitous across the Azure platform really help to ease what could be the burden, some corporations or organizations' burden of moving to the cloud, which is this fear of security, and showing that there's a good argument to be made that moving your stuff into Azure actually makes it more secure.
Yes, absolutely. So another feature and I really think this is an area where Azure gets to flex its muscle, right, is active georeplication on Azure SQL Database. The reason being is because now it allows you to tap into the global scale of Azure, and it's really taking a problem which has been very prohibitive to organizations in the past to implement and making it as simple as clicking something through the portal. So active georeplication allows us to do failover of an Azure database to a secondary region within Azure. And we've set this up here for your disaster recovery of your website. And it's been phenomenal. Like I said, we fail over to West US, and really with just a couple minutes of configuration, we now have failover with an RTO of about a minute and a recovery point of objective of about 5 seconds, because it's doing real-time replication of your data across to the secondary.
And think about just a couple years ago, the amount of money and the amount of time that it would have taken us to actually do something like that.
And I don't think you ever would have gotten there because of that, right?
Right. Most organizations would just choose to live with the risk. And even for us, we are only a Pittsburgh-based company. Our customers are only in Pittsburgh. And there was some question about why Well, do you even care? And it's just in case, right? Just in case something in the East region happens, we can fail over to the West region.
Yep.
The organization that I used to work for was a global organization, and I look at this tool set and think to myself, oh my gosh, what problems it would have solved had I had it 2 years ago.
Absolutely. So on a similar vein, that's on the database side, there's also something out there called Traffic Manager, which is actually a really flexible tool. It's a DNS service out there in Azure. We use it for fault tolerance for our actual X-site domain. So we actually point our DNS to Traffic Manager, and Traffic Manager monitors, okay, it looks like our primary deployment of this website is up. Great, we're going to route traffic to this. But in the event that anything happens and that connection is lost, it'll automatically help fail over to our WestUS website. One of the great things, and this also ties into kind of the digital transformation, the automation side of things, is when we take a look at VSTS, we actually have our DR site as part of our VSTS continuous integration. So it doesn't just stop at prod, it'll actually push through to the DR as well. And what I think about is the amount of time it would take someone doing this stuff manually is still feasible, but we went through a test of this DR example, I think about a month ago, and it took about 20 minutes to run through our test, as opposed to if you're doing this in a full-fledged kind of environment where you're doing backup and restores and everything, it could be quite tedious.
Absolutely. I mean, just having gone through that before without this tool set, it is just incredible. I mean, like you said, 20 minutes is almost ridiculous. And looking at this, again, the organization I used to work at was international, and we had Australia offices, but our website was hosted out of Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And so we always had to deal with the issue of latency from Australia. Mm-hmm. And so implementing ways around that took weeks, probably actually, for us to get through everything, weeks if not months, in order to get a solution in place that probably wasn't even as robust as the Traffic Manager solution.
Wow. That's interesting stuff. So let's take a moment to switch gears. And we're going to talk, I'm going to go through that diagram again of kind of the way that it's laid out architecturally, but at the DuquesneLight.com site that is. But let's switch gears for a little bit and talk about kind of software development process, because that's really a big part of your role as well, helping to define the process that your developers are working through here at Duquesne Light. I'm curious, obviously Agile and Scrum have kind of become the de facto standard for software development, but that doesn't, a lot of organizations still struggle with it, right? Defining the right mix of Scrum and implementation. Can you tell us, are there any common pitfalls that you've found through your career and any kind of key considerations to make, throughout your organization's lifecycle management process?
Absolutely. So I am a big proponent of Agile software development. I've implemented it throughout my career. And when I first came upon that Agile manifesto, it really spoke to me. Mm-hmm. And so Scrum, as you said, happens to be kind of the flavor of choice in the Agile methodology that has gained a lot of traction, and really one that I've dug into. But it's truly that Agile mindset, I think, that makes all of the difference in the world. It is buying into that paradigm. It is buying into the fact that communication is, in fact, more important than documentation, regardless of what you do. So coming into Duquesne Light, we definitely wanted to, there was no Agile development here. So we wanted to implement Agile. We definitely implemented Scrum for new development, new projects. We implemented Kanban, actually, for our production support environment.
Oh, wow.
So we implement Kanban boards, and either feature requests or bugs will fall onto a Kanban board, and that development support team will just pull them off and actually work them through our Kanban boards. So we've kind of taken I always say you need to take an Agile approach to the implementation of Agile in your organization.
Yeah,
so
Scrum to Scrum, right?
That's right. There's no right answer for any one organization. You have to see what the culture is like. And I will tell you that one of the big pitfalls is that you start to think to yourself, I don't need the traditional project manager or BA,
sure,
those types of things. And I'll tell you that is a big pitfall.
Yeah.
So the traditional role of the project manager, you probably won't have work breakdown structures and things like that. But that Scrum Master role really becomes truly, truly important inside of your Scrum development cycle.
Yeah, and I'll echo what you mentioned about like QA and BAs. right? That need has to be there.
Absolutely,
right?
And you just call a BA becomes the product owner inside of your Scrum, right? And so things like making sure that your product backlog is really, really groomed well. And what is that? That's requirements gathering. That's talking to the users about how they want this feature to actually work for them. And the documentation piece of that for us is our VSTS, that product backlog item right there. It becomes the source of truth. But making sure that those things are well groomed, maintained, and all of that stuff is so, so important to the implementation of Agile. Developers start to think of Agile as it'll be a little bit less work. I actually argue that the workload that it puts on developers might even be a little bit more because you're going in there and you're talking about estimates of remaining hours and things like that. But when you see the benefits of the value that you can produce to the business customers in the short amount of time, you start to see why.
Yeah, definitely. 100% agree. And so another, so obviously Scrum is very well established. Another kind of movement that's going on, which is picking up a lot of steam, is DevOps.
Yes.
Right? And it's spreading rapidly through the technical community. I do see when I'm talking to customers, sometimes I think there's some confusion between Agile and DevOps. Whereas I see them as being complementary. There's two very distinct things. Do you mind talking about that?
No, absolutely. So it definitely is something, and I look at DevOps. So I would say that we here at Duquesne Light haven't fully embraced a total DevOps model. Now, maybe within the corporate applications team, we are moving towards more of a DevOps mindset. But where I mentioned about the Agile mindset, I really think that is key to the DevOps movement as well. It really is this mindset. It really is remove barriers to value. And it is getting people more closely related. It is having communication and collaboration and not all of these walls. Think about your old traditional IT approach where there were so many walls and you would throw things over the wall and wait for a response, and just get those folks into the room. Or empower a developer. What I keep telling our ops team is you set the guide rails for us, we'll stay within the guide rails. If we happen to stray outside the guide rails, talk to us about it and we'll move back in the guide rails.
And it really is about that collaboration, right? And when you think about Scrum, you're talking about methodologies and collaboration, which help facilitating business requirements and business scenarios and product development. And when you talk about DevOps, it's very similar. It's collaboration, communication, but around operations kind of development.
Exactly.
Right? How do you deploy? How do you maintain? How do you monitor your application? And then feeding that back into your Agile process so you can make improvements to that as you go. Exactly,
because that iterative approach to the Agile development is very similar to the kind of that DevOps model. Let's iterate, let's learn, the fail fast and then iterate, learn, and change, right? So, and I'll tell you that when I first got here, I really was, let's implement DevOps. And there was a little bit of hesitation from all areas of the organization. As we start moving down the road, everyone is liking the way that things are working with our implementation of Azure. And I start telling people we're doing DevOps. So when I say we haven't fully embraced
good stuff and then tell them what it is.
Exactly. And now, this mindset is really what we're changing over to. And forget about organizational structures and all of that stuff. You don't need to change your organizational structure or design or anything to fully embrace the DevOps model.
Great. So you guys are currently leveraging VSTS. That drives a lot of your software development. It drives a lot of your business requirements, and it drives our CEI and our continuous delivery. I'm curious, what brought you to the VSTS platform as opposed to other platforms?
So coming up on the Microsoft stack for most of my career, and actually when I got here, my directive was to build out our Microsoft Center of Excellence here. So I have familiarity with on-premises Team Foundation Server, right? So my team was all very familiar with TFS. We were all basically TFS folks. When I first got here in July of 2015, the organization had just stood up its very first on-prem TFS server. And so there wasn't enough in it at the time that when I got here, I said, whoa. And I think at the time it was called, TFS Online or
Visual Studio Online.
Services or something at the time. But it was basically TFS in the cloud, and we hadn't been far enough along that we weren't able to quickly make that shift. So think about everything we've talked about up until now, which is embracing the platform as a service.
Yeah.
And TFS truly for us was our development platform, in addition to Visual Studio. So being able to and having gone through many on-prem TFS server upgrades and maintenance, never having to worry about that again.
We didn't have fun doing that.
We did not have fun doing that, but we really, really embraced the cloud. The one thing that we were missing at the time was some of the flexibility of customization that we had with the on-prem.
Sure.
And that has quickly caught up. So every month we get what's the newest release and features, and wow, we've quickly kind of caught up to the fact that we can do pretty much anything that we wanted to do on-prem, we can do on the team services piece.
In fact, we do some stuff on-premise, as we'll see. We actually push automated deployments to on-prem servers here. So, no, I think that's great. And, some of the things that I love about it, number one, it's a comprehensive tool set. Like on this slide, it's kind of showing a sampling of the services you get. As a small entity of my own, I was working for a customer that was an open source shop, and they had worked in Jenkins and Bamboo, and they had set that kind of automation up. And we were doing a POC around VSTS, and so I set up build automation, deploying out to Azure, doing resource group deployments, and deploying the web app out there. And I was demoing it, and some of the people who were maybe more involved in the Jenkins and Bamboo deployment that maybe had a little bit of stake in that, they were giving a little pushback, and they said, well, yeah, but seriously, how long did it take you to do all this? I told them it took me a day.
Right.
And they were just silent. They didn't know where to go from there. There wasn't much of an argument to be had because they probably had spent weeks on it, setting it up on their end, right?
Absolutely. And I actually have, and you know him, Chris on my team actually came. I was the CTO of a company that was an open source shop for a while. Mm-hmm. We were PHP and the LAMP stack, right? Mm-hmm. And so we started to try to implement some of those tools that you described. When I had left there and went to my next job, and it was back in the Microsoft stack, which I was so happy about, but I knew Chris knew how to do software development. He just didn't know the tool set. So I brought him over, and that is my story of the convert. That is my story of somebody who grew up in this open source stack, and when you showed him, first off, just showing him the Visual Studio IDE, it was like these lights went off in his head, and it was, what have I been doing up until now? And he is all in, so I have an example of that as well.
I'm going to give him a hard time about that. Yeah, and I love that. And the other thing I love about it, and I think what ties into that ease of use is how integrated the whole platform is, right? When you see Azure and Visual Studio and VSTS, and you do something in Visual Studio and it lights things up in VSTS, it lights up Azure, you're getting alerts through VSTS on things that are going on in Azure. It's all fully integrated. You don't have to be juggling a number of different technologies in order to get a full scope of your application, right?
Absolutely, and we've let our business folks, our internal customers, into our VSTS environment for total open visibility into what we're doing, and it's just been tremendous.
Yeah, awesome. So application insights. So this is an interesting tool, and this is one that actually you've made heavy use of here, and I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on kind of how it's changed the way you manage and monitor your applications. On the previous slide, one of the things that we saw as part of a best practice or habit, we want to gather evidence in production, right? Because we want to have a constant feedback loop of deploy, learn, bring back into our backlog, deploy, learn, bring back into our backlog. So how has App Insights work for you, and how has it changed the way that you monitor these applications?
So, it really has done just that. It's totally changed the level of, and I hate to say it, but insights that we really get. That deep telemetry that's just turned on for you with the platform and the tool set that we're using has been a tremendous boon for us. When we did a very, very quick development of DuquesneLight.com. It was a total rewrite in very short order. And we did everything, and we focused on quality and all of that. But as good as we aren't developers who write completely bug-free code.
Sure.
So after deployment, using insights and really having those things pop up to us and just tell us the things that it was seeing that maybe we weren't seeing or hearing about. We have 600,000 customers out there that are banging away on our website, and not all of them, if they run into a problem, call our call center and complain about it. So we knew about it from these insights that App Insights were able to provide us, and we have been able to make more use of them as we've learned a little bit more about the tool set, so that we can really get finely detailed, almost like the Azure Advisor was providing those types of things for fixes. the App Insights reports that we get provide us such insights that they inform what we are going to be working on in our next sprint.
Yeah, and even some of the web job, or not the web jobs, some of the web tests that you set up in there, right? To be able to just throw in a web test which can hit multiple pages and start to look if I'm getting 404s or if I'm getting 400 errors, to now actually start sending proactive alerts out so that we know the health and status of our application before we're actually starting to get those calls from customers.
Exactly.
Huge as well.
And not having to pay for that and setting that up from just within the App Insights portal. I mean, your example of the 20 minutes, it took minutes to do that. And the insights and the proactive not having to be called about our website, we are the first ones to know if there's an issue.
Yeah, and one of the other things I love about it is the predictive kind of maintenance that they give you, the predictive monitoring. So every once in a while I'll get an alert that says, you know what, your website's running about 2% slower than normal.
Right.
I wonder if it's a traffic, I wonder, something you might want to look into.
Yes.
Right? So very cool stuff. So we've been talking about a lot of the services. I wanted to kind of take a quick top-down approach, and this isn't 100% inclusive of the entire solution, obviously, but I want to give kind of a lay of the land in terms of what this looks like out there in Azure as we've moved it across. So starting from the top down, obviously we have users making requests through their browser. This is a website. The first thing that they're hitting from the browser is Traffic Manager, right? So we have the DNS pointed to our Traffic Manager endpoint, and Traffic Manager then makes a decision. How am I going to route these users? Am I going to route them to our primary site, which is hosted here in East US because we're in Pittsburgh? And Traffic Manager is going to constantly monitor to detect whether or not that is healthy. It's probing constantly to make sure that it can actually reach that site. Assuming it can, great. It'll actually use the East US site to app service to service that. If it can't, it'll actually go ahead and go to our secondary, which is out west, which is a clone of the site that we have here. It's another app service that's hosted out there, but we actually deploy to that through VSTS the same way we do for our primary. The next thing, so once it turns to route, we're going to actually get routed to our app service, which is hosting a number of things. It not only has our website, we also leverage it for web jobs, right? So oftentimes, a website is more than just a public-facing UI. A lot of times you have some batch things you have to do or some scheduled tasks that you have to do. And instead of, ramping up servers and putting Windows services, custom Windows services and things, we have the option of web jobs. And now, it's been out of preview for a couple months. We also now have Azure Functions, which we're looking at as well for some other scheduled tasks. So we're using, again, those platform services to remove friction from us in terms of any kind of infrastructure so we can just bring our code and our logic and our app to it. So we can see here that we have failover. We can also see that the app service is hitting as a couple services that it's leveraging. So it's obviously leveraging a number of SQL Server repositories. We have App Insights running behind the scenes, as we said, to monitor and start to, our application as well to start to understand the usage of the application. We're using Redis cache to help offset some of potential performance issues when we come here on-prem to access information from your back-end systems. And as we mentioned, we have web jobs as well. Really interestingly is that as we use VSTS, which as you said is like the cloud version of TFS, that's driving the build, deployment, and release of our site to Azure. But we also have another component of this which we call CCSB, which is our kind of our services layer, so our web API layer, which we build on top of kind of some of the back-end Oracle services that you have here as kind of a one-stop shop for accessing and posting information to those systems. That's hosted on-prem just because all the back-end servers that are supporting them are on-prem, so we want to keep them closed. And we actually use VSTS through VSTS, which hosts in the cloud, to deploy to those on-prem environments, which is pretty cool. So you're not necessarily, just because you're in VSTS doesn't mean you have to be all in on cloud, right? You can still use a lot of these features while being on-prem. And I will say that, my intent, and I think our intent was to demo some of this stuff. We're running a little late on time, and I want to make sure that we have time to answer any questions that might have been coming up too. So I'm going to kind of hold off on this demo for now. We can maybe decide to circle back if we have time, but I just wanted to show a little bit of VSTS. We'll hold off on that for now. One thing I think is important is this is kind of where you are, and you obviously are establishing a direction, and you're moving towards a lot of end goals, and digital transformation is driving a lot of that. I'm curious if we can talk a little bit about some of the thoughts you have for the future of Duquesne Light and the technological direction that we're going.
Sure. So we have a lot of things that I'm really excited about here at Duquesne Light, and things that services that we're taking advantage of in the Azure platform, like the bot framework, for instance. So when we talk about just different ways to interact with our customers, and Jeff, you actually built for us our first prototype of a chat bot.
Yep.
So imagine just being able to text your light company and say either my power's out or what's my balance, and being able to have a conversational, transaction where we can actually just ask natural language questions and answer those up.
And I love it too, because I was doing some research on this, and it's some ungodly number. The number of text messages that are sent a day by millennials is something like 17 billion a day. It's something ridiculous. And it just makes you think of, again, those channels for interfacing with across channels that they're already familiar with, right? If they're already in SMS and already texting, allow them to interface with you from an area that they're already comfortable with.
Yeah, and so we're really excited about that and really think that that's a big part of the future. I think also, and I mentioned it a little bit, but we have 600,000 customers out there, and we're in the middle of our smart meter deployment, which is essentially putting the old dial meters are now no longer what we put on houses.
I sadly still have one, but
yeah, so you still have one. I have one of the new meters. So the new meters are basically little computers that go on the side of your house, and they can talk back to us. So from my perspective as a technologist, we are deploying 600,000 little IoT devices across our service territory, and the massive amounts of data and the things that we can do with that is just really exciting. And just think of the quick example of knowing that your power's out, Jeff, wanting to subscribe to the fact that you get a text message when your power's out. So maybe you don't even have to tell us anymore, and we just reach back out to you and tell you it's back on.
Because I have 2 young kids, and being at a house with 2 small kids with no power is frightening in itself. So being able to get out of the house maybe for a little while and come back when everything's back up and running.
Absolutely.
It's very
probably the biggest part of our future, and the IoT piece plays into that, is big data.
Yes.
So imagine and I spoke recently at a big data conference, and I spoke there last year, and I wanted to do kind of a 1 year later at Duquesne Light, and I never imagined a year ago that we would be fully embracing data lakes and Hadoop and HD Insight clusters and all of that stuff, and within a year, we are already doing that. And so big data is a huge part of our future. Azure machine learning and just machine learning. We have our first data scientist on staff here who's really chomping at the bit to do some of these things that we're talking about. Propensity to call, fault, detection, all of those types of things are all part of the future roadmap for technology here at Duquesne Light, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, and Hadoop's a great example, right? Because that's something where we could stand up Hadoop and infrastructure, but then you have to bring all the expertise of what it means to configure a Hadoop cluster into that world. You have to be able to configure it. You have to be able to set it up. You're going to be paying for it as that thing's up.
Yes.
As opposed to what we did, which is use HD Insights and that Hadoop environment with very little Hadoop experience in terms of configuration setup. We had it up in less than a day.
Absolutely. And think of the data lake store.
Right.
So just an HDFS cluster to store this massive amounts of data. I mean, we could put 10 terabytes of data there for a few $100.
Yes,
I mean, it's just crazy.
Truly amazing. Well, I do want to end by just saying, Sanjay, thank you very much. We really appreciate you sharing your time and your insights with us. I wanted to cover just a couple of quick things, and then maybe we can see if there's a few questions that we can answer.
Yeah.
So hopefully you guys found the information in this webinar useful. If you are currently not an Azure subscriber, but you're interested in subscribing, you have a couple of avenues. If you go to azure.com, very well highlighted, you'll see a link for a free trial of Azure, which you can use. Also, if you're an MSDN subscriber, you already have Azure credits available to you. So if you have not actually activated those credits, if you go to your MSDN account, you can see information there about how to do so. And one of the things I would suggest is if Azure and cloud is an area that you're looking to get into, I think Sanjay said as well. Your kind of, I don't want to call it a test bed, but your entrance into Azure, you decided it was going to be the DuquesneLight.com website. I think that's a great way to go about it. Find a workload or two that makes sense. No one's going to take their entire IT operation and dump it into the cloud in a day.
Right.
You want to find something that works for you and move it there. So if it's something that you're interested in, I would suggest taking a look at kind of your technology backlog and maybe pluck out a thing or two that you think might be good candidates, whether or not it's dev test scenarios, whether or not it's application hosting like DuquesneLight.com scenario here, big data, IoT, storage. I mean, there's a number of features here which you could go into, and I would encourage them to go to azure.microsoft.com to learn more about it. But one thing that I will say is that to support this effort, from now until March 31st, CEI is offering, in conjunction with Microsoft, a one-day workshop to kind of help and assess and identify strong candidates in your organization for cloud adoption. So, Megan, is there anything that you wanted to add to that in terms of the free one-day assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something we actually did with Sanjay here at Duquesne Light, and I think he saw a lot of value in that. And this can be a one-day on-site or remote kind of engagement with you, yourself, your team, just to get you up to speed on Azure, or maybe you want to consider some workloads to put into Azure, some of which we cover on today's webinar: dev test, DevOps, application hosting, big data, IoT, storage, and new application development. So there's a lot of opportunities here, and we want to help you, invest in modernizing your platforms. So if you are interested in this, you can feel free to send me an email, mabernathy@ceiamerica.com, or give me a call on my phone, 412-571-3622, and we can definitely set up some time to review that. And on the right there, you can just see some other capabilities of ways that we can help engage with you, everything from a workshop to figuring out how much, you might need to consume of Azure to get you guys set up. So definitely a good engagement, and we hope we can add some value for you guys.
All right, thank you, Megan. So at this point, Megan, are there any questions for us?
So it didn't seem like any came through the message panel, but if you guys want, you can go ahead and start writing those down if you do have some questions, and we'll kind of hang on the line here for the next 5 to 10 minutes to address any you might have.
And hey, folks, this is James. I just wanted to say thank you again to Sanjay and Megan and Jeff for doing this. This has been really great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James.
So Jeff, we have Richard here who asked if we can actually show some of the demos that we, skipped on there towards the end. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Great.
What I was going to show is, and I'm showing it now, is actually the Duquesne Light DSPS environment. So I'm not going to go through all the pieces of this here, but like we said, it's kind of an all-inclusive environment if you haven't worked in it before. So it helps enable work item tracking, sprint-based management and monitoring, QA, so test center integration with your QA, build and release pipelines as well for deployments and continuous integration. So what I wanted to show is just kind of the whole build process that we have, and to be frank, how easy it is to set up. So we do have two builds.
Hey Jeff, are you still out there? I think I might have lost some audio.
Off of commit that we make to trunk. So in our world, trunk is truth. Trunk is saying that this code is ready to be deployed through the cycles and make its way up to production. That's how we set up our branching structure. So this is actually triggered anytime we commit the trunk, and that's typically a merge. We typically do feature branches and we merge into trunk as we release new features. Again, we're trying to stay with a model where we're actually deploying out to production at the end of each sprint, so we're moving those features in every 2 weeks. As far as the build goes, and a lot of this stuff is actually templated. You go in, you say new build, and it does 99% of this. So we're just doing things like NuGet package restores, building the solution, and then we're basically dropping the artifact here so it could be picked up by the next step in the pipeline. This is simply building the code. Then we actually want to release the code to our environment. I think Sanjay actually mentioned that we're using something called deployment slots in Azure App Services. Deployment slots are a way of allowing you to have multiple versions of your application within a single environment. Oftentimes we use that for like a dev, test, and prod environment, which is what we're doing here. So when we actually publish this out to the drop location, we can then take a look and see what happens. Because once that gets published, what automatically happens is our release gets kicked off. And you'll see here on our release that we have this color coding of these different environments, as they're called here. These are our dev, test, stage, beta, and prod environments. Now, the interesting thing here is if we dive in, is that you get to configure each of these environments separately. You can have different app settings for each environment. These can be different deployment slots or even different resource groups for each environment if you want to. But the really great thing about release management is not only the ability that allows you to actually push code through this pipeline, but it actually allows you to have a human workflow and approval process, which is helping to drive that. So here's where we're actually defining the different environments. And as you'll see here as well, we also have this DR environment as well. And I actually lied. So we actually push up through beta. And what we do at the point of when we get to beta, we do what's called a VIP swap. So a VIP swap is a virtual IP swap between deployment slots where we say what was deployed to beta should now be deployed to prod, and what was in prod now gets flipped to beta. And it's simply in the back end, just an IP swap from an Azure perspective. So there's virtually zero downtime, and in the event that something goes bad with a production deployment, we can easily swap it back and roll back and get back to a good state, figure out and go through another cycle. So interestingly though, different groups of people are responsible for different environments. The developers are pushing up here and they want to go through development testing because they don't want to waste QA's time, to be frank. They want to make sure that everything is as they assumed it would be functionally when they commit their code. But when they say that, there's a point where dev says, okay, we're good. We trust this code. We believe that it's working the way we intend. And at that point, there's actually an approval process which kicks in where we actually go ahead and have a step where a developer approves this to go to the next step. And that's someone manually going into VSTS and clicking, I approve this. Typically, that would be like a tech lead or someone on the team that's responsible for taking responsibility for the build. And when they approve it, it then gets queued up for test. And at that point, we actually have a two-step approval process. Dev approves it to be pushed onto test, and test has to approve the acceptance of it because QA may not be ready. Maybe QA is in the middle of some other things, so they won't actually approve that deployment until they're ready to receive it. So you can actually see an example of this. I'm not actually going to do it, but here, that's actually a manual intervention. But what you would see in here is that when like QA comes in here to look at this, they double click it, they would have a button to say approve or reject. And they were either approve or reject it. And the really great thing about this is it actually takes, all this is working off of a single build. So you build once, deploy multiple times, right? So you have the same bits that are getting deployed. There's no chance of different code or DLLs kind of eking their way in. So at the point when the dev approves it and QA approves it, then release manager is responsible for going through and then deploying it based on that environment. And we push that all the way up through beta, all the way up through DR, and then like I said, we VIP swap. To do prod. The only other thing I would mention here is that, like I said, BSTS is not only confined to working with deployment and releases in the cloud. We also have a solution which we're deploying on-prem, which is our web API layer, which is interfacing with the back end. And we can look at that release, and we can see that we're still pushing it through a very similar pipeline. In fact, we're using the same APIs and the same UI through BSTS to define this, but this is actually deploying on-premises. So slightly different task here, but even though it's driven through Azure and through VSTS in the cloud, it's still able to connect on-prem. So that was really what I wanted to show. I don't want to show too much of, we could have a whole large discussion about VSTS in general and its capabilities and everything, but that's really what I was hoping to show you guys in terms of continuous integration, continuous delivery. And the great thing is how flexible it is. Every organization is different. They all have different workflows and different patterns, and it's very malleable for those. So I'm not sure if it's a tool that you're using today, but if not, it's definitely something worth checking out. Are there any other questions, Megan?
Not at this time, no.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, James, and Megan as well, and a special thanks to Sanjay for being with us today.
Thank you, guys.